they've always got something on the plate, mostly because they take a long time to deal with anything, so there's always a lot of things pending. There's actually been some good action from the FCC enforcement branch in the last several months. Last year when I was up here, we were talking back and forth about how come things aren't happening in enforcement, and ARRL was absolutely unhappy with it too, and we've been trying to work on ways to get them to pay a little bit more attention to the amateur service. And we don't need them to spend 100% of their time on ham radio, and they wouldn't even think of doing that. But we need them to do a little bit occasionally to get some of the worst problems dealt with. In recent weeks, there's been some QST or ARRL website articles on 3 or 4 different enforcement actions the FCC has taken. They cited one company, this isn't really amateur radio, but they cited one company for a cell phone jammer. The owner wanted to make sure his employees didn't use cell phones during the day, during work. You can't do that. Cell phone jammers are illegal, so they're actually, trying to make a point out of this one company, and they fined them not just a little bit. They fined them $25,000, and I think partly because the company wasn't entirely upfront with how long they've been doing it and what they were doing. But a $25,000 fine gets you a lot of attention. If things get to the point where the FCC decides that a fine is the appropriate action, they don't fool around with $50 and $100 and $500 fines. They start at like $5,000 or $10,000 and go up from there. There was a recent $2 million fine for somebody who was doing phone soliciting of some sort. I don't remember the details, but they have the ability to fine in very big numbers, and sometimes they'll back off on them if the individual or company can make a case for it. But in the end, they're serious when they actually do enforcement. A lot of their enforcement, though, happens behind the scene. They'll deal with a lot of people one-on-one, talk to the people causing problems, talk to people to find out what's really going on. And so a lot of things that come up, they do deal with behind the scenes, and we never hear about it. We don't hear anything when they do it behind the scenes. The only time we hear about it is when they actually either find somebody or send out a letter telling them that they have been found doing something and they'd like an explanation for it. And then the FCC will make some of that public about who they're dealing with. But even then, they don't usually even put in call signs or addresses or names. I think they just leave the town information in what they post publicly. So the kinds of things they do are often kind of hidden behind the scenes. There's a couple of shops selling illegally modified radios to either operate on 10 meters or amplifiers to work on 11 meters that have been cited in recent months. And then a ham who was also a CB'er in Texas got nailed because he was ticked off at some other CB'ers and was going on some CB channel key down with a lot of power to try to cause them problems. And sometimes it's the second guy that throws the punch that gets nailed, and this guy got nailed. So anyhow, they're doing some things. There are still some problems in the amateur community that we all run into from time to time on some bands, and the FCC pretty much knows about them. Whether they take action or not is kind of their call and their priorities. A lot of things you hear are kind of annoying out there, but they're not all illegal. So there's also a limit on what they can do. For instance, the FCC still doesn't have a good definition of obscene to enforce, because they've had some court cases related to TV and other things over the years that have been thrown out in court, and they still don't have a good definition of what it is. So if you go on the air, and I don't want you to do this, start swearing with 4-letter words, the FCC can't do much about that at this point because they don't have a good enforcement mechanism for that alone. But if you're doing that, you're probably doing other things that they can get you on. It's sort of like you nail what was it in Chicago? They nailed a gangster out there for tax evasion.
It was Al Capone. They got him on
Al
tax
Capone.
evasion.
It's tax evasion, not for the other things that he did. The FCC will find a way if you're a real problem that they need to deal with. But our point from ARRL is that we like to see them doing something from time to time so we can make people aware of it, and maybe that'll make you think about it the next time you're on the air. Same way they don't nail everybody that's going 70 miles an hour on the highway, but they do get a few once in a while, and that makes you think about the next corner that you're around. Okay, FCC. One other thing that I think was really important for us, a couple of weeks ago, we filed a complaint with the FCC about some ballasts for fluorescent lights that are used as grow lights. The Part 18 of the FCC rules has some limits for fixtures like that, and we found, with some help of a bunch of hams who had run into local problems, identified a particular manufacturer, Chinese manufacturer. It was imported into British Columbia and then into Washington State, and they're used in a lot of places around the country as ballasts for lighting for marijuana growers. Some places it's legal, sometimes it's not. It depends on where you are. But the lamps themselves were radiating at about 50 dB above the FCC limits. That's a lot. That's a real lot. One of the guys that had a problem lives in Maine, W1QS, Queen Sugar. Not here today, but he lives somewhere along the coast, I think, north of Portland. And he had a real substantial problem with a commercial building about a quarter mile away, apparently legally doing whatever they're doing, but it was something that it was S9 plus on most bands for him, and he finally tracked it down to the ballasts, and we know the manufacturer number and so on, and so that's not a unique problem. We had a problem in Colorado. We've had a problem in other places. The filing with the FCC identified the manufacturer, the part number. We actually bought one and tried it in the lab. We did a whole lot of careful measurements about the measurements the FCC wants devices like that to go through before they go on the market. And for the most part, the FCC doesn't do any measuring anymore. They basically say, if you're going to market one of these things, give it to a testing lab or self-certify that your product meets our rules. And that works for a lot of things, but it doesn't work for everything. And the other piece is that you can order a lot of stuff on the internet that doesn't even go through any checks. You just order it directly from wherever, and your product may or may not meet FCC requirements because it's not made here. They should theoretically look at it as it comes into the country to make sure it meets the FCC specs. But it's really easy to put a label on it that says it meets the specs, whether you check them or not. Anyhow, we filed a complaint against a number of places that were marketing them and wholesaling them a couple weeks ago, and we're hopeful that the FCC will take some action and cause the people that both sold these and are using them to make some changes by replacing the lamps with something that's quieter. The FCC has the power to require the manufacturer to recall them all and replace them, I believe. That would be a good thing for a small business that bought them not knowing that they were a problem. But that's, whether the FCC acts quickly or not on that, we don't know. They have their own timetable sometimes on some things, and we just don't know how quickly they might act. They were even being sold through a Sears online outlet, and Sears, within a couple of days of us filing it, that link went away, so I guess they're not selling them anymore. So that's one of the things we're doing. We know that the manufacturer of this particular device is not the only one that has had these kinds of problems, so we included in the filing with the FCC a note that there are others like it that the FCC should be taking a look at. I believe we're going to be buying a couple more also to take a look at them. But it was a bad enough problem, we decided we had to file with the FCC and start the process of getting them off the market. Anyhow, so that's one thing. We're still, I've talked about for a couple of years now, one of our big spectrum worries is in the 230 to 3 or 4 gigahertz range, which is where the national broadband rollout is looking for spectrum for Wi-Fi and other devices to both connect all of our phones, but also to provide broadband access from the home. And they're looking to take about 300 megahertz of space in those in that range of frequencies. And they're looking both at the spectrum that's used commercially, and they're also looking at government spectrum. The reason that's important to us is that most of our allocations above 2 meters are on bands that we are secondary with federal services of some sort or military. And if they're looking at military and government frequencies to pull back and use for broadband, then we're at risk as well. On some of those bands, we have some knowledge about what the federal government is doing, and that may help protect us. Like I use the example on 440. There's wind profiler radars. There's apparently a bunch of military fire control systems. Fire control meaning shooting systems that use 70 centimeters in some fashion. And there's other stuff in other bands that we really don't know about, but we think exists there that'll help us protect. But we have a lot of frequencies up there that we have access to, and many of them don't have a whole lot of users. You know, if I ask around this room, I bet almost nobody in here operates 1.2 gigs or higher. Okay, we got one over here. Higher than 1.2? We've got a lot of spectrum at 2.3 and 3.4 and in the 5 gig range. Of course, you probably all operate on 5 gigs but it's Wi-Fi, not ham radio mostly. So we have some exposure and on those bands, and they may decide to go after them for reassignment. We're working on that. We're working with partners that we know we have in some of those areas to minimize the impact on us, and we'll see how that goes. A petition was filed last year that finally was posted last week from a company that does wireless routers or something called Mimosa Networks that wants to use some of the 10 gigahertz band for some activity, and they actually said, by the way, we're trying to make sure we don't interfere with the amateur radio use of the band by doing X, Y, and Z, which is kind of a new way for somebody looking for spectrum to say, look, we know there's users there, we're trying to avoid them. The problem is they didn't do it in a completely effective way, so we don't think it's going to work. And the other piece is they're really not allowed to be there as a commercial user on spectrum that's primarily government frequencies. So we've got some things to work on there, but that's an existing issue.